Picture a place where a man can work every single day from February to November, can drag his body out of bed before the sun, can bleed his fingers down to raw meat, can sweat through 4 shirts in a single afternoon, and still, at the end of it all, owe more money than he started with. Now fill that place with heat. Not the kind of heat you know. Not the kind you complain about on a summer afternoon when the air conditioning isn't working right. Mississippi Delta heat in July is a living thing. It sits on your chest. It turns the air into wet flannel. It makes the horizon shimmer and wobble like the world itself is having second thoughts. Add the smell of red clay mud baking in that heat. Add the smell of 1,000 acres of cotton, row after row after row, stretching to the tree line in every direction like a white tide that never quite reaches shore. Add wood smoke from a dozen shotgun shacks. Add the grease smell of fatback frying in a skillet that hasn't been properly washed in 15 years, because why would you wash it? The seasoning in the iron is the only flavour you've got. That's the Mississippi Delta, Leflore County, 1933. One of the richest agricultural regions on earth, and the people working it are going hungry. Not metaphorically hungry, not I skipped lunch and now I'm irritable hungry. Hungry like you count the number of dried beans left in the jar on the shelf and do the math in your head about how many days they'll stretch. Hungry like your grandmother puts less in her bowl so you can have more, and she's been doing it for so long that you only just now figured it out. We're going back there tonight. Not as historians looking at cotton bale statistics, not as economists analysing the collapse of agricultural prices during the Depression. We're living it. One summer, one family. Everything they would have eaten and almost eaten and dreamed about eating and survived on when there was nothing left to eat. I make these sleep stories, and I genuinely cannot tell whether any of you are actually sleeping or whether you are all just lying in the dark being upset about the fact that a man could work a full year and end up poorer than when he started. Either way, welcome, get comfortable. The story I'm about to tell you is not a comfortable one, but it is true, and it happened to real people, and some of you have grandparents who lived it. Here we go. Your eyes open in darkness, complete darkness, the kind that has weight to it. For half a second, maybe less, you've forgotten where you are. There's a moment, brief and merciful, where you're just a body in the dark, warm, formless, not yet a person with problems. Then the smell hits you. It's not one smell. It never is. First, wood smoke, still hanging in the air from last night's fire, which Mama Grace banked down low before bed to save the wood. There's something almost sweet in it, because the wood was hickory, split and dried, and hickory smoke smells like something people in cities pay money to put on their food. But underneath that, the damp. The walls of this shack sweat at night, especially in July, and the wood has been wet and dried and wet again so many times that it's gone soft in places, gone grey and crumbly, and it smells like something old and tired, like a thing that has been used past the point where it can recover. Then, the chicken. There's a hen roosting just outside the window. She squeezes herself in through a gap in the boards every night despite everything, and she smells like what chickens smell like when they're wet and warm and sleeping, which is earthy and dense and not entirely pleasant. And underneath all of it, the delta itself. You can smell it even through the walls. That heavy, ancient smell of flat black soil and standing water, and something green rotting slowly under the surface of the bayou 200 yards to the east. The Mississippi Delta was the bottom of an inland sea once. 40 feet of sediment laid down over millions of years, the richest topsoil in the world. It smells like it knows what it is, like it's been patient for a very long time. You are Elias Monroe. You're 16 years old. You're lying on a cornshuck mattress in a shotgun shack on the Calhoun Plantation, 4 miles north of Greenwood, Mississippi. And it is 5 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday in July of 1933. And even before you are fully awake, your body already knows that today is going to be hot and long and hard. The corn shucks shift and crackle under you as you move. That sound, dry and papery and specific, is the sound of every morning of your life. From the next room, you can hear Mama Grace, not moving yet, but awake. You can tell the difference between her sleeping sounds and her lying there thinking sounds. The sleeping sounds are deeper, more surrendered. The thinking sounds have a tightness to them, a held-back quality, like a person who has things on their mind and knows that morning is coming to make them all real. She's been awake since 4, probably. She does this more in summer. In summer, things need to be figured out. You swing your legs off the mattress and put your feet on the floor. The floor is bare wood, but it's not cold. Nothing is cold in Mississippi in July. It's just less hot than the rest of the room. Your feet are calloused enough on the bottoms that you don't feel the splinters anymore, unless you're moving fast. You learned that lesson at 8 years old. Learned it with blood on the floor, and Mama Grace picking a 1/2 inch of pine out of your heel with a sewing needle. You move to the window. It's not really a window. It's a square cut in the wall with 2 boards that swing out, hinged with pieces of leather from an old belt. You push them open and lean out into the not yet morning air. The delta sky before sunrise is the darkest blue you've ever seen anywhere. Not black, not grey. Blue, deep and clean. And at the eastern edge of it, just at the tree line past the cotton fields, there's a thin, pale line that hasn't quite decided whether to be pink yet. The cotton is already out there in the dark. 40 acres of it, assigned to your family's plot. You can't see it, but you know it's there the way you know your own body is there without looking at it. From somewhere in the sycamore tree by the road, a mockingbird starts up. It cycles through maybe 12 different bird calls in 30 seconds, including something that sounds improbably like a rusty gate hinge. Mockingbirds are the only comedians left in Leflore County in 1933. Everything else is serious. You pull on your clothes, work clothes. The difference between work clothes and regular clothes in your wardrobe is theoretical. You have a shirt that's less patched than the other one, and you save that one for church. The work shirt goes on, the overalls. They were your father's, taken in at the waist and hemmed at the ankles by Mama Grace 2 years ago when he left for Chicago and left the overalls behind along with everything else he didn't want to carry. You don't think about that for more than a second. A second is all you allow it. Boots. The left one has a crack along the sole that lets in water when you're in the wet rows after rain. You've stuffed a piece of cardboard inside, cut from the flour sack, and it helps for about half a day. Then the cardboard gets wet and compresses and you're back to squelching. From the next room comes a sound you've been hearing your whole life, the scratch and pop of a match, and then the small yellow eruption of the cook fire catching. Mama Grace is up. The kitchen is the back room of the shack. In a shotgun house, everything is in a line. Front room, bedroom, kitchen. So that you could theoretically fire a shotgun through the front door and the pellets would travel straight through every room and out the back. That's where the name comes from. You've never thought about this. It's just the house. The kitchen has a wood stove, black cast iron, heavy as a judgment, cracked along one side from the time the pipe came loose in a bad storm, and cold air hit the hot iron fast. The crack has been there since before you were born. Mama Grace packs it with a clay ash mixture every winter to keep the smoke inside the stove where it belongs, and every summer it dries out and crumbles a little, and she packs it again. It's held for 30 years. It will probably hold 30 more. On top of the stove right now, the skillet. The skillet is so old that its surface is black as tar and smooth as glass, from 30 years of grease baked in, layer by layer, season by season. When Mama Grace dies, if God is merciful enough to let her outlast this depression, someone in this family is going to fight over that skillet. It is the most valuable object in the house. In the skillet, a piece of salt pork about the size of your palm, fatback, the fat heavy strip from the back of the hog, salted down in a barrel to keep through summer. It's been sitting in that salt barrel in the corner of the kitchen since March, when Mr. Calhoun's man delivered the annual provisions, the things that get charged to your account at the commissary, the debt that gets added to the other debts, the weight that sits on top of everything else. The salt pork hits the hot skillet and makes a sound like a short, sharp argument. Grease begins to crawl out from under it, spreading across the iron in a slow, dark tide. Mama Grace is standing at the stove in her house dress and her head wrap, stirring something in the pot with a wooden spoon that has been stirred so many times it's concave on one side, worn down by decades of pots. She's 53 years old. She looks older. Not because she's been treated badly exactly, or not by any one person, but because the work has been enormous, and it has been constant, and it has asked things of her body that her body was not built to give forever. Her hands on that wooden spoon are the hands of someone who has picked cotton and washed laundry and wrung chicken necks and hauled water and done 10,000 other things that hands were asked to do before machines took over. Strong hands, always warm, the most reliable thing you know. "Morning," she says, without turning around. "Morning, Mama Grace. Cornbread from last night's still good, and the peas are almost ready." You look in the pot. Black-eyed peas, started last night and simmered down overnight over the banked coals. In the peas, a piece of the salt pork's twin, already mostly dissolved into the liquid, lending it a smoky, deep, salty flavour that is the only reason these peas are worth eating at all. The peas themselves are soft and mealy and filling in a way that sits in your stomach like a decision. On the shelf above the stove, the cornbread, made yesterday in the cast iron pan, turned out flat and dense, the colour of straw. Cornmeal, water, a little lard, a little salt. No eggs this week. The hen hasn't been cooperating. No buttermilk. When there's buttermilk, it's better, lighter, but there's no cow on the place right now. The cow that Mr. Calhoun's grandfather kept for the sharecropper families died of something in the spring of 1931 and hasn't been replaced. This is breakfast. This is also, depending on how the day goes, lunch. You sit down at the table, 2 sawhorses with a plank across them smooth from use, and Mama Grace puts a bowl in front of you without ceremony. The peas are ladled over the cornbread, which soaks up the pot liquor and softens and becomes something almost other than what it started as. Something almost good. You eat. The salt hits you first. The salt is always the first thing. Everything you eat here has salt in it, because salt is how you kept food alive before the icebox, and the icebox on the Calhoun place is not for sharecropper families, it is for the main house. So everything is salted down or smoked or dried, and after a while your tongue stops expecting anything different and just accepts salt as the basic flavour of existence. Under the salt, the pork flavour that's soaked into the peas, smoky and fatty and deep. Under that, nothing much. The peas are what they are, nourishing, dense, not exciting. But you are 16 and hungry, and your body doesn't care about exciting. Your body wants the calories. Your body's about to walk 4 miles to the far end of the cotton fields and spend 12 hours in the sun, and it is already calculating what it needs, and the peas are what there is, and so the peas are what you eat, all of them, and you use the last piece of cornbread to wipe the bowl. Mama Grace eats less than you. She always does, and you've been pretending not to notice for 3 years. Gonna be hot today, she says. Yes, ma'am. You take the water jar, the big one. The big one is a ceramic jug she got from the Tillman family down the road when their grandmother died. It holds about 1.5 gallons of water, and if you fill it in the morning and wrap it in a wet burlap sack, the water inside stays cool for maybe 4 hours before it starts going warm. After that, it's just wet, and it's what you've got. Mr. Daniels say they might weigh in before noon, you say. Mama Grace makes a sound that is not quite a word. It's a sound that contains an entire opinion about Mr. Daniels, who is Mr. Calhoun's field overseer, a thin white man from Alabama with a permanent squint and the habit of finding fault in the numbers at weighing time in a way that always seems to go against the picker and never seems to go against Mr. Calhoun. Just you pick, she says. Don't worry about Mr. Daniels. You just pick clean and you pick fast and you keep your eyes down. You know what that means. You've known what that means since you were old enough to understand that keeping your eyes down in Leflore County in 1933 is not a posture of shame, but a posture of survival. You fill the jug from the barrel by the back door. The barrel collects rainwater off the roof, and you filter it through a piece of cloth, and it tastes of wood and old leaves and something mineral from the roof shingles, but it's clean enough. In the summer you boil it if you can spare the wood for it. In the summer you get sick sometimes anyway. The cotton sack is hanging on the peg by the front door, 9 feet long, made from canvas, with a strap that goes over the shoulder. When it's empty it weighs almost nothing and drags behind you like a pale grey tail. When it's full of raw cotton, it weighs 100 pounds, and the strap cuts into your shoulder through the shirt, and by the end of the day your left side, always the left, because you're right-handed and the sack goes over the left shoulder, feels bruised down to the bone. You pick it up. Mama Grace ties her head wrap tighter, takes up her own sack from its peg. She's been picking cotton since she was 5 years old, which was 1885, which means she's been doing this for 48 years, which is longer than most people live in Leflore County. She steps out the door first, into the heat that's already building even before sunrise, and you follow her out into the delta. The walk to the far end of your 40 acres takes about 20 minutes. In the early morning, before the heat has fully organised itself, you can almost convince yourself that this is beautiful. The cotton plants are chest high now, July high, full of bolls that are beginning to crack open, splitting along 4 seams into white puffs of fibre that the plants have been building all season like they're letting secrets out. In the angled pre-dawn light, the white bolls glow faintly against the dark leaves. The rows go straight to the horizon. The sky's going from dark blue to lighter blue to the first suggestion of pink. If you were a painter, which you're not, and will never have time to be, this would be the moment. But you are not a painter. You are a sharecropper. And what you see when you look at a cotton boll is not beauty. You see a locked box. You see potential money that isn't yours yet, that might not be yours even after you pick it, that will pass through so many hands between the field and your pocket that by the time it reaches you, if it reaches you, there will be almost nothing left. Cotton in 1933 is worth 5 cents a pound. 5 cents. In 1919, after the First World War, cotton was 35 cents a pound. People in the Delta talk about 1919 the way people talk about dreams they woke up from and are still mad about. 5 cents a pound means that to make $1, you need to pick 20 pounds of cotton. 20 pounds of raw cotton, which packs down into a loose fluffy mass, takes roughly an hour for a fast picker. A very fast picker. A picker who has been doing this for 48 years and whose hands know the motion the way lungs know breathing. You can pick about 200 pounds on a good day. With good cotton, without stopping, that's $10. That's a good day's number. Except you don't get $10. The cotton goes to Mr. Calhoun's gin, which charges a fee to separate the fibre from the seed. The seed gets sold separately and the money from that goes to Mr. Calhoun. The ginning fee comes out of your share. The cost of the sacks comes out of your share. The cost of the provisions, the salt pork, the cornmeal, the seed, the tools, the use of the land, all of it, all year long, has been recorded in a ledger at the commissary, and all of it comes out of your share. At settlement time in November, when the crop is sold and the books are balanced, you will see what's left. Most years, what's left is nothing, or less than nothing. But it's July now, and the bowls are opening, and you haven't gotten to November yet. And there is something in the human body that is very good at not thinking about November when it's July, and there is work that needs doing. You set your sack down at the end of your row. Bend. The first bowl of the day. You reach into the open bowl, 4 or 5 segments of white fibre, each about the size of your fist when compressed, each attached to a hard woody base called the burr, and you pull, fast, clean. The cotton comes free with a sound like a small breath, like the plant exhaling, then the next bowl, and the next. This is the thing about picking cotton that nobody who hasn't done it can quite understand. It's not the individual bowl that's hard. The individual bowl is nothing. Pull, release, deposit in the sack. Pull, release, deposit. Each one takes maybe 2 seconds if you're moving. It's the 10,000 of them. It's the fact that you bend down to the low ones and reach up to the high ones and shuffle forward along the row, dragging the sack behind you, and the row is a 1/4 mile long, and when you reach the end you turn around and start the next one, and there are so many rows that you don't count them anymore because counting them makes something in your chest tighten. The sun comes up at 6:15. By 6:30 it's already warm in a way that means business. By 7, the back of your shirt is dark with sweat, and your hands are moving in the mechanical, automatic way that your hands move when the work has taken over from the thinking. Pick, drop, shuffle. Pick, drop, shuffle. The sack gets heavier behind you with each handful, and you check it sometimes by lifting the strap. You can tell by the pull of it roughly how much you've got, the way a fisherman can tell by the weight of a net. Your fingers bleed a little. They always bleed a little in the early season before the calluses fully harden back up. The cotton bowl is all fibre and softness, but the burr, the woody casing that holds the bowl, has points on it. 4 or 5 hard little spurs that catch the skin if you're moving fast, which you have to be. By noon your fingertips will be crisscrossed with small red lines, none of them deep enough to stop you, all of them stinging when sweat gets in. You don't stop for the blood. You don't stop for anything except the water. The water you drink from the jug in long, careful swallows, not too much at once, because too much water in the heat makes you sick. Mama Grace told you this, and it's true. You proved it once at 11 years old by drinking half the jug at once on a 98-degree day and spending the rest of the afternoon with your head between your knees at the end of the row, the world swimming. The jug goes from cool to warm to hot. By 9, the water is the temperature of the air. By 10, the air is 93 degrees. At 10:15, a sound comes from the far end of the field. A bell. It's the weighing bell. A handbell Mr. Daniels carries in his wagon, and the sound of it means bring in what you've got. You hoist your sack. It's heavy. Maybe 110, 120 pounds. You and Mama Grace between you have picked maybe 230 pounds this morning, which is good, which is better than yesterday, which means almost nothing when you do the math, but which your body registers as a kind of satisfaction anyway. The satisfaction of work done as well as work can be done. You drag the sack to the weighing wagon at the end of the field. Mr. Daniels is there with his scale and his ledger. He's a narrow man, narrow face, narrow eyes that don't look at you directly when he talks to you, but at some point just past your left shoulder. He calls you boy, even though he knows your name. He has known your name for 3 years. Morning, boy. Let's see what you got. He hooks your sack to the scale. The needle swings. 107 pounds. He writes it in his ledger. Grace Monroe, what you got? Mama Grace's sack goes up. 121. Right. 228 for the Monroe plot. You'll need to do better on the afternoons. Mama Grace says nothing. You say nothing. 228. You did the math already in your head on the walk over. 228 pounds of cotton at 5 cents a pound is $11.40 gross, before the gin fee, before the sack rental, before the interest on the provisions account, before a dozen other fees that are in Mr. Calhoun's ledger, which you're not allowed to audit, which you have only ever seen the final number from, the number at the bottom that says what you owe. 1140, before everything. Mr. Daniels writes it down and moves to the next family. You drink the last of the warm water, refill the jug from the barrel on the wagon that Mr. Daniels keeps for the workers. That water has been sitting in the sun all morning and it's hot enough to make tea with, but it's wet and you need it. Mama Grace hands you a piece of cornbread from her apron pocket, wrapped in a cloth, dense and cold from the morning. You eat it standing up, there by the wagon, while Mr. Daniels tallies numbers in his ledger, and somewhere in the distance a crow calls once and then goes quiet. This is lunch. Then you go back to the cotton. Here is what the commissary provided this year, and what it costs and what it does to you. The commissary is a wooden building at the edge of the main plantation house grounds, painted white once but now weathered grey, and listing slightly to the right like a man who's been standing too long in one place. Inside it smells of flour and coffee and new denim and old wood and something that might be mouse, back in the corners where the sacks are stacked. Mr. Calhoun's man is Beaumont Haas, who is large and slow-moving and not unkind exactly, but who is the instrument of a system that is unkind, and who has grown comfortable in that role the way a man grows comfortable in shoes that don't quite fit, aware of the discomfort at some level, no longer naming it. The provisions come at planting time, in February. Cornmeal, 25 pounds, salt pork, 15 pounds, molasses, 5 gallons, seed for the 40 acres, use of the mule. These things are written in the ledger. The prices in the ledger are not the prices you would pay at a store in Greenwood. They are higher. How much higher you cannot say for certain because you're not permitted to compare. This is how commissary pricing has always worked. Everywhere there have been commissaries. The company stores at the coal mines up in Kentucky do the same thing. The mill towns in Georgia do the same thing. It is a system designed not to provide goods at fair prices but to maintain debt. And maintaining debt maintains the labour. And maintaining the labour is the point. So, the cornmeal at the commissary costs more than cornmeal costs elsewhere, and it goes in the ledger, and at settlement time it comes off your share. But right now it's July, and the cornmeal is almost gone, and the salt pork barrel is getting low, and the molasses jug has maybe 2 inches left in the bottom, and there are 4 months until settlement and 4 months until the next allotment. And so you eat what the commissary doesn't provide, which is where it gets interesting, which is where, if you know what you're doing, which Mama Grace does, you eat pretty well. Not rich, not even close to rich, but you eat. The bayou is 200 yards from the back of the shack, a thin arm of the Tallahassee's drainage system, slow and brown and shallow in summer, shaded by cypress and cottonwood and a tangle of muscadine vines that hang over the water. You go there in the evenings when the cotton day is done. The cane pole is behind the shack, a length of river cane cut 2 years ago and dried. A piece of cotton string tied to the end for a line, a bent nail filed to a hook. Not beautiful, but functional. All tools on the sharecropper's plot are functional. You dig worms from the wet earth near the rain barrel before you go. Thick night crawlers, red and muscular, that come out when you turn the soil with a stick. 3 or 4 is enough. Catfish aren't particular. You walk through the cotton. You know the path between the rows, you could walk it blind. And you come out into the shade of the bayou trees and the temperature drops maybe 4 degrees, which in July feels like a mercy from God. The water smells of mud and green algae and something faintly rotten, but not unpleasantly. It's the smell of things growing as dying and becoming soil again. The same endless cycle that made the delta. You sit on the bank and you put the worm on the nail hook, and you drop the line in the water and you wait. Catfish don't make you wait long in summer. The water is warm and they're hungry. In maybe 20 minutes you've got 2. Channel cats, each about a foot long, fat and whiskered, pulling hard against the string before you flip them onto the bank. They flap in the dry grass, mouths working. You kill them quickly. You've been doing this since you were 9. 2 catfish will feed you and Mama Grace tonight. Not with anything left over, but fed. You carry them back to the shack, head them and gut them at the step with a knife from your belt. Wash them in the rain barrel water. Their flesh is pale and dense like wet cloth. It smells of the bayou, of mud and cold and deep water. Mama Grace fries them in the skillet in the last of the lard. The lard is from the salt pork, rendered out and stored in a tin can. When the lard can gets low, you use whatever you've got. Bacon drippings, the fat from a possum, sometimes a spoonful of the vegetable oil that comes in the commissary supplies, though there's never much of that. The fish in the lard sounds like applause, a fast, sustained sizzle. The smell that rises is fat and salt and something sweet from the fish itself. And after a day of nothing but cornbread and black-eyed peas, that smell is the best thing you know. She dusts them in cornmeal before they go in, just a thin coating. The cornmeal crisps in the fat and makes a thin crust, golden brown, that cracks when you bite into it and gives way to the soft white fish inside. You eat at the plank table in the kitchen with the 2 oil lamp flames throwing shadows on the wall, and outside the cicadas are going full-throated, the way they do in Mississippi in July, a sound so constant you stop hearing it except when you stop to listen to it, and then it's enormous. This is a good meal. You don't always have this. The greens start in May and go until the frost. Pokerweed first. It comes up tall and fast along the fence lines and the edge of the bayou, pushing purple-green stalks up through the May soil like something aggressive, which it is. Poke is aggressive. Poke is a plant that does not wait to be cultivated. It just comes. You have to know what you're doing with poke. The root is poison. The mature leaves are poison. The berries that come in the late summer are beautiful and purple and deadly. But the young shoots, in May, when they're still tender and no taller than your knee, those you can eat. You pick them, you bring them home, you boil them once and pour the water off and boil them again, and what you have is a cooked green that tastes something like spinach, slightly bitter, slightly dark. Mama Grace calls it poke salad. She's been making it her whole life. Her mother made it. Her mother's mother made it. She cooks it with a piece of the salt pork. Everything gets cooked with a piece of the salt pork, because the salt pork is the flavour. The salt pork is the backbone of everything. The pork goes in the pot first, renders down, and then the greens go in and cook down in that fat, and they shrink to almost nothing. A pile of fresh pokeweed the size of your arm fills down to a bowl's worth of cooked greens, and they soak up the salt and the smoke and become something that your body recognises as what it needs. There's also mustard greens growing wild along the road, and lamb's quarters, which looks like a weed, which is a weed, which also happens to be edible and slightly sweet when it's young, and dandelion, which is bitter raw and slightly less bitter cooked, and which is everywhere. In August, the muscadines start coming in on the vines over the bayou. They're not grapes, not exactly, though they're grape adjacent. They're round and fat and purplish black, and they have thick skins that you spit out and sweet tart flesh inside that stains your fingers as your lips. You eat them right off the vine, standing at the water's edge. They don't last. They go overripe and ferment fast in the heat, so you eat them when they're there. In September, the persimmons. You have to know about persimmons or they will ruin your day. Before the first frost, a persimmon is one of the worst things you can eat. So astringent it makes your mouth pucker and go dry, makes your lips feel like they're turning inside out. But after the frost hits, after that first cold snap in October when the temperature finally drops below 40 overnight, the persimmons soften and sweeten and become something close to beautiful. Orange gold, soft as butter, sweet as molasses without the edge. You pick them in October with a pole, knocking them down from the trees along the fence line. Mama Grace makes persimmon pudding. The recipe is persimmons mashed, cornmeal, eggs if you have them, sweetening if you have any, molasses, or sometimes a little cane syrup from the Tillman's garden. Mix and bake in the skillet. It sets like a dense cake, brown and sweet and slightly spiced. With nothing because there are no spices, but it tastes spiced somehow, the persimmons themselves carrying some warmth. You eat it warm on October evenings, and it is the best thing about October. The squirrels are year-round, but best in fall, when they're fat from the hickory nuts and pecans they've been hiding all summer. Your .22 rifle is the second most valuable thing in the house, after the skillet. It belonged to your grandfather, was old when he got it, has been repaired so many times that hardly any original part remains. But it works and you know how to use it. You go out in the early morning or the late afternoon, the 2 windows of relative coolness, and you walk the tree lines and the bayou edges and you wait. Squirrels are not clever. They are fast and they are small and they have good eyes, but they are not clever. If you're still long enough, quiet enough, they forget you're there. 2 grey squirrels will make a pot of Brunswick stew big enough for 2 days. Brunswick stew is the squirrels, whatever vegetables you have, usually sweet potatoes from the garden plot behind the shack, the garden being the half-acre of food crops that Mama Grace tends separately from the cotton, the thing that keeps you eating through the worst parts of the year, onions from the garden, corn, if it's been a corn year in the garden, butter beans, dried from last year. All of it in the pot with the squirrel providing both the meat and, from its bones and joints after long simmering, a thin broth that has more body than plain water. You add salt. You always add salt. You add whatever else is available, which changes with the season and the week and the luck of the gardens. Brunswick stew is a different meal every time because what goes in it depends on what there is, which depends on what has grown and what hasn't, which depends on the rain and the heat and whether the rabbits got into the garden and how many squirrels you found, and whether the sweet potatoes came in or rotted in the ground, which in a wet year they sometimes do. It's the recipe of whatever is left. In the Delta in 1933, almost everything is the recipe of whatever is left. There are things you don't eat unless you have to. Possum is one of them. Possum is edible. People eat possum. People have been eating possum in the Delta since before anyone alive was born. But it's greasy in a way that coats your mouth and sits in your stomach differently than other grease, and it has a smell when it cooks that is distinctive and not entirely pleasant. You eat it when the squirrels aren't around and the catfish aren't biting, and the salt pork barrel is getting low. Mama Grace makes possum with sweet potatoes, which is the classic preparation. The sweet potatoes absorb some of the grease, and the possum absorbs some of the sweetness, and together they become more than their parts, which is the alchemy of necessity. You cook with what you have until what you have becomes something. Coon, raccoon, is better than possum. Leaner, darker meat, something almost like pork in the flavour if you cook it slow enough. You parboil it first to get the gamey off it, then slow roast it in the Dutch oven with onions and whatever else you've got. Wild rabbit is the best of the wild meats. Clean tasting, mild, enough fat on a full rabbit to make the dish rich without being heavy. You set snares for rabbits along the bayou where they come to drink at dusk. Loop of wire, bent twig as a trigger, set across the path and left overnight. In the morning you go check and hope. Sometimes there's a rabbit, sometimes there's nothing. Sometimes something has sprung the snare and taken the rabbit, and left you with a piece of sprung wire, and the knowledge that something out there is eating better than you are tonight. Here is a thing that happens in the Delta in 1933 that no one talks about in polite company, that few people write about in the newspapers, that the economists measuring agricultural output don't include in their studies. Children eat dirt, not accidentally, not out of ignorance, on purpose, deliberately seeking it out. A specific kind of soil, usually clay, white or light grey, from certain known deposits, certain creek banks or exposed hillsides. It gets eaten by pregnant women, by nursing mothers, by children who are hungry in a way that food, when food is scarce, cannot fix. It's called geophagy. It has happened everywhere, People have been hungry. It happened in ancient times, in medieval times, in every corner of the world where food is not certain. Here it happens quietly. You don't discuss it. It is not shame exactly. It is just one of the things that is, and that you do not make larger than it is by naming it. Mama Grace does not eat dirt. She eats less than she should. She takes the smaller portion. She pretends not to be hungry in the evenings when there's not enough, but she does not eat dirt. You have eaten it, once when you were 12, on a day in February when the provisions were gone and the hunting had been bad and the snares had been empty for a week. A white clay bank by the bayou, cold and smooth, tasting of nothing, filling the empty space in your stomach for an hour before the need came back. You don't think about that day very often, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, when you're lying on the corn-shuck mattress listening to the cicadas, you think about what it means to be hungry enough for that. You think about what it says about a system that brings a 12-year-old to a clay bank in February, and then the morning comes, and there is work to do, and you get up and do it. Because what else do you do? Every 10 days or so, when the provisions run low, or when there's something that needs that you can't grow or catch or find, you make the walk to the commissary. It's 1.5 miles along the road that runs between the cotton fields. The road is dirt, red clay that turns to red mud when it rains and bakes to red concrete when it dries, and is always either one or the other, and sometimes both at once. The surface dry and cracked but soft underneath from last week's rain. Your boots leave prints in it, record of your passing, gone the next day when someone else walks over them. The commissary is open in the morning and closed for the hottest part of the afternoon. You go in the morning. Beaumont Haas looks up when you come in. He's been sorting bags of tobacco on the counter. "Monroe boy," he says, "what you need?" You have a list. It's not a real list. You haven't written it, partly because paper is not free, and partly because you don't need to write it down. It's the same list it always is. Baking soda, and see about cornmeal. We're getting low. How much cornmeal you want? 5 pounds if we can. Beaumont moves to the bin and scoops cornmeal into a sack on his scale. He weighs it, ties the sack, writes in the ledger. The ledger. It's a large book, black cloth cover, the pages worn soft at the edges from being turned. It sits on the counter always, open, which is more than some commissaries. Some plantation commissaries keep the ledger behind the counter, won't let sharecroppers see what's written. Beaumont lets you see, which is either fairness or the confidence of a man who knows that whether you see or not changes nothing. You look at the most recent line, Monroe plot. Cornmeal, 5 pounds, 28 cents. 28 cents for 5 pounds of cornmeal. In Greenwood, at the general store on Howard Street, 5 pounds of cornmeal costs 16 cents. You know this because a boy from town told you once, and you've been carrying that number around for 2 years like a stone in your shoe. But you cannot get to Howard Street and back in a day on foot, and you have no credit at the Howard Street store, and the Howard Street store does not front you your provisions in February and trust you to pay in November. The commissary does, which is the reason the commissary exists, and which is how it earns its premium, and which is how the debt stays alive. Baking soda, Beaumont says, adding it to the line. Anything else? You look at the shelf. Your eyes go to the coffee almost by their own will. Real coffee in a paper sack. The smell of it reaches from across the room, something rich and dark and entirely beyond your reach. You look away. "No, sir, that's all." Beaumont closes the ledger. You pick up your supplies and walk back out into the heat. On the walk back, you pass the Winslow plot. Will Winslow is outside his shack, sitting on the step, not working. This is unusual enough that you stop. He's 40 years old, Will Winslow. His wife died of fever 3 years ago. He's been farming alone since then, which is hard. Cotton farming is a family operation. The economics of it depending on multiple hands. One man on 40 acres can't pick fast enough, can't chop fast enough, can't do everything that needs doing between February and November. Will, you say. Elias. He looks at you. His eyes are red, not crying, just dry from the sun and the dust. You hear about the meetings? No, sir. Down in Tironza. Somebody's organising the sharecroppers. White and coloured both, they say. He says this quietly. Not from shame. From the specific kind of quiet that lives in Leflore County in 1933. The quiet that calculates distances before speaking. You've heard something, actually. Not much. Someone mentioned it on a Saturday in Greenwood, standing outside the barber shop. A union, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, organising across the Delta, saying that sharecroppers, white and black both, were being robbed by the same system and ought to stand together against it. It's a radical idea in 1933 Mississippi, in some places a dangerous one. What do you think about it, you ask? Will Winslow looks at the cotton field across the road from his shack. 40 acres of another man's land that he has worked his whole life and cannot own, and cannot leave and cannot profit from in any meaningful way. I think, he says slowly, that a man gets tired. He doesn't say anything else. You nod and walk on. The commissary supplies are heavier than they should be, or maybe your arms are just tired, or maybe it's not the weight at all. There's a boy named Cornelius Tillman, 12 years old, lives on the next plot south. His grandmother, Ada Tillman, is Mama Grace's oldest friend, the kind of friend that two women become when they've weathered the same long storm side by side for 40 years. Cornelius comes over sometimes in the evenings when the work is done. He's a small, quick boy with enormous eyes that seem to be recording everything. He doesn't talk much, but when he does talk, it's usually worth hearing. One evening in August, he shows up at the back step with something cupped in his hands. Look, he says. He opens his hands. In them are 4 muscadine grapes and a small, perfect wild plum, purple-blue, the size of a marble. Found a plum tree, he says, back past the bayou, past the big cypress. Big one, loaded. A wild plum tree. In the Delta in August, a wild plum tree loaded with fruit is news of the best kind. You go the next morning before the sun is properly up. Cornelius leading the way through the cotton rows and into the tree line and along the bayou bank through the tall grass that soaks your boots with dew. The cypress trees lean over the water, their knees pushing up through the shallows. The air here smells of water and mud and crushed leaves. And then the tree. It's not large, maybe 20 feet tall, but Cornelius is right. It's loaded. The branches hang heavy with small plums, purple, blue and dark red, some fallen already into the grass beneath. You pick for an hour. Your hands and lips and the front of your shirt go dark with plum juice. The plums are tart and sweet and slightly earthy, the skin slightly bitter, the flesh bright and cold even in the heat because the tree is shaded and the fruits have been hanging in the shade. You eat while you pick, which is inefficient but unavoidable. A fresh fruit in August in the Delta is something your body responds to automatically and without asking your permission. You bring home a full basket. Mama Grace makes plum jam in the afternoon. the kitchen filling with a smell that is sweet and hot and fruity, the smell of August concentrated into something you can put in a jar. She uses the last of the sugar, a paper bag of it from the commissary, the last of the sugar allotment, not replaced until next February, and the plums, and she boils them together in the big pot, skimming, testing, until they coat the back of the wooden spoon. She pours it hot into 3 jars and seals them with wax. For November, she says, November is when the settlement comes. November is when you know what kind of winter you're facing. November can be many things, and Mama Grace makes preparations for the harder possibilities. But the jam that didn't fit in the jars, the last half cup that remained in the pot, that you eat right now, still warm, on the last heel of the cornbread, standing in the kitchen while the August afternoon roars outside. The sweetness of it is startling. After weeks of salt and fat and cornmeal and beans, sweetness hits your tongue like a conversation you forgot you were allowed to have. You close your eyes for a moment. You're 16 years old. Your fingers are stained purple red. The kitchen smells of jam. Somewhere outside, a pair of mockingbirds are having a vocal argument. For 1 minute, standing in the kitchen with plum jam on the cornbread, and the morning's work behind you, and the afternoon's work not yet begun, things are all right. Then Mama Grace hands you the empty pot to wash and the afternoon begins. The 3rd Sunday of August is when Reverend Beauchamp makes his circuit. He comes from Greenwood, driving a mule and a wagon, covering 4 or 5 sharecropper plots every Sunday. The Baptist church in Greenwood is where you'd go if you could get there, but 4 miles is too far on foot when you've worked all week, and the mule belongs to Mr. Calhoun and is not yours to borrow on Sundays. So the church comes to you, not just Reverend Beauchamp, the other families too. On the 3rd Sunday of August, the Monroe plot becomes the gathering place. Everyone comes. The Tillmans, old Ada Tillman and her daughter's children, 5 of them including Cornelius, ranging from Cornelius's 12 years down to a baby that was born in March, and has Cornelius's same enormous serious eyes. The Carters from the far end of the road, with their 3 grown sons who do the work of 6 people because they have to. Old Robert Jessup, who is 78 and the oldest man on the plantation, and who remembers things about this place that nobody writes down. Everyone brings something. This is the rule, unspoken, consistent as gravity. You bring something. What you bring depends on what you have, and what everyone has is not much, but together it is more than it is separately, which is why the gathering exists and why it has always existed. Ada Tillman brings a pot of field peas, purple hull peas from her garden, cooked since this morning with a ham hock that she's been saving for exactly this occasion. The pot liquor in that pot is dark and savoury and has body to it, the kind of broth that a person sitting in a chair in some other century might pay good money to sip from a bowl. The Carter family brings sweet potato pie, 3 pies, which sounds generous until you understand that there are 18 people gathered, and the pies are made from sweet potatoes, which the Carters have in their garden in abundance, and lard from their larder, and nothing else much. No eggs this week, so the pies are dense and sweet, but not as rich as the best version of this pie can be. It doesn't matter. Sweet potato pie is sweet potato pie. Mrs. Carter also brings fried chicken. This requires explanation. Fried chicken in Leflore County in 1933 is a Sunday food, a special occasion food. You don't eat it on Tuesdays. You barely eat it on Sundays. Chicken is worth more alive, laying eggs, than it is dead, but on special occasions, the third Sunday of August when Reverend Beauchamp comes, you sacrifice one of the laying hens and you fry it. The smell of fried chicken, of chicken in a skillet with hot lard, of the crust forming golden and crisp while the fat pops and sizzles. That smell is the smell of good things, the smell of generosity, the smell of a community that has chosen, despite everything, to continue feeding itself and each other. Mama Grace's contribution is the cornbread, 3 pans of it made since early morning, dense and golden, and a pot of something she spent 2 days preparing. It started as dried butter beans, soaked overnight, cooked all yesterday with the last serious piece of salt pork from the barrel, thickened until the broth was almost creamy from the starches releasing, seasoned with salt and pepper and a bay leaf she's been saving in a tin by the stove. She also makes a salad of whatever the garden had this week. Cucumbers, 3 of them, sliced thin. A tomato, 1 big one, the kind that splits its own skin from ripeness. Sliced onion, a splash of the apple cider vinegar she makes herself, which tastes aggressively sour and which is the closest thing to a condiment you have. Old Robert Jessup brings catfish. He went out last night and sat at the bayou until past midnight because Robert Jessup hasn't slept well in 20 years and doesn't mind the dark. And he came home with 6 big cats, and he fried them this morning in a cast-iron skillet over his outdoor fire, and he carried them wrapped in newspaper to the gathering. And Reverend Beauchamp, who earns almost nothing preaching to the sharecropper plots on his circuit, brings the one thing nobody else has, a watermelon. He grew it himself, in the strip of land behind the parsonage. Round and heavy and dark green with lighter stripes, it hits the wooden table with a resonant thump when he sets it down, and every child present goes immediately toward it with the instinct of creatures that understand what a watermelon in August means. Mama Grace cuts it open with the big knife, and the green rind splits and gives way to red flesh that is cool. Genuinely cool, even in the August heat, the way watermelons are cool from their own chemistry, and it smells of summer and sweetness and water. The children get the first slices. This is the law. They stand in the yard eating watermelon with both hands, the juice running down their wrists and elbows, and they spit seeds and they laugh, and the seeds land in the red clay dirt of the yard, and most of them won't grow, but a few of them will, and next year there might be volunteer watermelons growing in the yard from this afternoon's seeds, which is a pleasant thought. You eat everything at the gathering, not in an embarrassing way, in the way of a 16-year-old boy who's been picking cotton since February, and whose body runs on whatever fuel is available and processes it immediately into more picking. The butter beans on the cornbread, the catfish, crispy and salty, a piece of the sweet potato pie, which is dense and warm and sweet, and a little spiced with cinnamon that Mrs. Carter keeps in a tiny paper envelope for occasions like this. The fried chicken, your piece being a thigh, which is the best piece because it has the most fat and the darkest meat. The cucumber tomato salad, which is mostly vinegar but also cold and sharp and cuts through all the fat in a way that your body thanks you for. 3 slices of watermelon. This is not a boast. This is a 16-year-old boy in 1933 doing the only reasonable thing a 16-year-old boy can do when there is watermelon. After the eating, the singing. After the singing, the preaching. After the preaching, the singing again. Because Reverend Beauchamp is a man who believes that music is the other half of the word. He has a voice that comes from somewhere below his sternum and travels through the afternoon air and lands in the middle of your chest. And when he sings, "Precious Lord, take my hand," in the Monroe Yard on the third Sunday of August, with the cotton fields on three sides and the sky going orange in the west, and the fireflies starting to appear at the edge of the bayou tree line. When he sings that, the sound of it does something to the gathered people that no other thing does. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't reduce the debt. It doesn't make the cotton price go back up to 35 cents a pound. It doesn't bring back the people who went north or the people who didn't make it. But it does the other thing, the thing the singing always does. It reminds everyone present that they are still here, still in this yard, still singing, still alive to sing. In 1933 Mississippi, being still alive to sing is not a small thing. There is a levee 2 miles east of the plantation, part of the system built after the Great Flood of 1927, when the Mississippi River broke through its banks and covered 1 million acres of the delta under 20 feet of brown water, and 250 people died, and 700,000 people were displaced, and sharecroppers were used as conscripted labour to build the emergency levees in conditions that people at the time compared, carefully, quietly, only among themselves, to something very old that was supposed to be over. The levee is 30 feet tall and flat on top, wide enough for a wagon, built from the delta soil, compacted and shaped into a wall between the river and the land. You climb it one evening in late August. No particular reason. You have an hour before dark, the fishing is done, Cornelius has gone home. Your feet take you east along the edge of the road and then up the slope of the levee, the grass on its face dry and yellow from the summer, and your legs push you up and up until you're standing on the flat top with the evening wind hitting your face and the world spread out below you in every direction. East, the Mississippi, or this branch of it, running low and slow in summer, brown and wide, the colour of strong tea. Boats on it even now, a barge, pushed by a small tug, sitting low in the water, laden with something. Cotton, maybe. Your cotton from last season or the season before, compressed into 500-pound bales and shipped downriver to the mills. West, the delta. All of it. Flat. Completely flat. This is the thing you cannot convey to someone who hasn't seen the delta. How flat it is. Not gently rolling, not rolling at all. Flat as a table, flat as glass, flat all the way to the tree line on the horizon, which is maybe 12 miles away, and which you can see clearly because there is nothing in between to block the view. In those 12 miles, cotton. Cotton in every direction, the fields laid out in rectangles, the plantation boundaries visible in the rows where different tenants' plots meet, and the cotton rows go in slightly different directions. The plots are like a patchwork quilt from up here, different shades of green where the cotton is different heights, different stages of bowl opening showing different amounts of white. And the shacks, the shotgun houses, you can count them from here. Yours is the one with the sycamore tree. You can identify it by the tree even at this distance. 13 of them on the Calhoun plantation, small and grey and low to the ground, the smoke from the evening cook fires rising straight up in the still air because there's no wind to bend it at ground level, only up here where you're standing. 13 families. You think about that. 13 families, most of them with multiple members, working this land. Working this land the way families have worked this land for 100 years, since before the Civil War, since this same black soil grew this same white cotton, under a different legal arrangement. The arrangement changed in 1865 and the arrangement changed again over the years following, but the cotton stayed, and the land stayed, and the families working it stayed, and the money from it went where it went, which was not to the families in the shacks. From up here you can see the main house, the Calhoun House. It's 4 miles north, beyond a stand of oaks, white and large, 2 stories, a porch, a barn, a shed, a brick ice house. Things that make sense if you have money. It's not visible from your shack. From your shack you see cotton and the bayou tree line and the road. From up here on the levee you can see everything, including the distance between the main house and the shacks. 4 miles of cotton. Not a long walk physically, maybe an hour, but the distance measured in other ways, in money, in authority, in who keeps the books and who never sees the books. That distance is something else entirely. You stand on the levee until the sun is fully down. The delta at dusk sounds like nothing you've heard anywhere else. The cicadas go from daytime volume to a higher, more frantic pitch as the temperature drops. The bullfrogs in the bayou start up, a deep chorus. A whippoorwill somewhere in the trees behind you calls its own name, over and over, which you've heard your whole life and never gotten entirely used to. The first stars come out. You think about your father who went to Chicago, who wrote twice in the first year and then stopped writing, whether he found what he was looking for up there, whether the thing he found was worth what he left. You think about the boys you know who are talking about going north. James Carter, who is 19, who has an uncle in Detroit. Lena Jessup's older brother, who left in the spring and sent a letter saying he was working a factory which paid wages, actual wages, not shares of a crop that you never see the full price of. You think about whether you'll go, and then you climb down the levee and walk back through the dark to the shack, because it's supper time and there are things that need doing, and going north is a thought for another evening, one where the walking back doesn't feel like something you've already decided. The cicadas are deafening the whole way home. November comes to the delta like an argument that's been building all year. The cotton is in, the last picking was done in October, the late bolls, the ones that opened after the main harvest, smaller and more scattered, harder to pick but worth picking because every pound is a pound. You picked until your fingers were raw, and the mornings was cold enough that your breath showed, and then there was no more cotton left on the stalks and the season was over. What remained? Bare stalks, brown and leafless, standing in rows across the 40 acres like the ribs of something dead. The cotton fields in November look like a cemetery for a creature you don't have a name for, and the commissary ledger. Settlement is on the first Monday of November. This is when Mr. Calhoun, or more usually his son Thomas, who runs the day-to-day operations, sits down with the ledger and the receipts from the gin and the weight tickets from the weighing-in days, and calculates what your share of the crop amounted to, and what your debt to the commissary amounted to, and what remains after one cancels out the other. In a good year, there's something left. $10, $20, if the yield was excellent and the price was decent. But in 1933, the price is 5 cents a pound. And this has not been a good year. You and Mama Grace walk to the commissary on the first Monday of November. The morning is cold. Not cold by northern standards, but the kind of delta cold that is surprising every time because you've just come through 5 months of heat, so dense it seemed permanent. And now the air has an edge to it and your breath makes small clouds, and the mud in the road has a skim of frost on it that crunches under your boots. Mama Grace is wearing her church coat, not because this is church, but because this is a formal occasion, and the church coat is the only formal thing she owns. It's black wool, heavy, with buttons that were replaced some years ago with different buttons from another coat, and which don't quite match. She holds herself straight in it. Other families are converging on the commissary from different directions. The Tillmans, the Carters, old Robert Jessup walking slowly with his cane, his breath steaming. Everyone in their best clothes or closest to it. Everyone walking with the particular gait of people going somewhere they'd rather not go. Thomas Calhoun is already inside. He's 32 years old, Thomas Calhoun. He went to Ole Miss, which his father likes to mention. He's not cruel exactly in the way that cruelty is active and deliberate. He's something more insidious than cruel. He's indifferent. The families on his plantation are, to Thomas Calhoun, problems to be managed, numbers in a ledger, pieces of an agricultural operation. He's not awake at night worrying about whether the salt pork barrel is running low. He hasn't thought about what a family of two eats in February when the provisions are gone and the weather is bad. He doesn't think about these things because they are not his job to think about, and because thinking about them might make it harder to do the math that needs to be done. He's behind the counter with the ledger open when you come in. "Monroe," he says. "Mr. Calhoun," Mama Grace says. He runs his finger down the page. You stand on your side of the counter and you wait. This is the thing about settlement. The waiting. Thomas Calhoun runs through the numbers at his own pace, and there is nothing you can do but stand and wait and watch his finger move down the page and wonder what the number at the bottom will be, and try to prepare yourself for whatever it is. Yield this year, he says, more to himself than to you. 2,412 pounds of ginned cotton. 2,412 pounds. You picked more than that. You know you did. The weight ticket said so. But the weight tickets are raw cotton. Cotton before ginning, with the seed still in. The ginning removes roughly 2/3 of the weight. What remains, the pure fibre, is the number that matters. 2,412 pounds at 5 cents a pound. You do the math in your head, because Mama Grace taught you to do the math in your head, always before he says the number, so that you know what the number should be before he tells you what it is. 2,412 times 5 cents. That's $120.60. Gross. Your share is 50%, Thomas Calhoun says. He says this with a kind of practiced neutrality, as though the 50% were a gift he were giving you rather than a statement of the fundamental terms of sharecropping, which are that you do the work and take half the risk and receive half the revenue. Half of $120.60. $60.30. Thomas Calhoun writes something in the ledger. Now, your account at the commissary. He turns a page. You watch his face, which gives nothing. Provisions, February through October. Cornmeal, salt pork, molasses, baking soda, lamp oil, seed. He reads the items. You've known all of these. Items were in the ledger. Use of the mule, also in the ledger. Ginning fee, in the ledger. Sack rental, in the ledger. Your commissary account stands at, he runs the number down, $107.42. There's a sound in the commissary, not from Thomas Calhoun, who keeps his face neutral, from Mama Grace, who makes no sound that you can point to exactly, but something shifts, something in her posture, something in the quality of the air immediately around her, $107.42. Your share of the crop, $60.30. You're short $47.12. Thomas Calhoun writes it in the ledger. He writes it the way he writes everything else, neatly without emphasis, in the regular hand of a man who does this 40 times a year and has done it for 8 years since his father handed the plantation management to him, and who does not, who genuinely cannot be made to, understand what the number at the bottom of the page means for the family standing in front of him. Your balance, he says, carries forward to next year's account. He says the next part more gently than the part before it, which is its own kind of cruelty. You'll start next season with a $47 deficit. I'll need you to be here February 15th for the provisions distribution. Mama Grace says, "Yes, sir." She says it in a voice that is level and quiet and contains nothing, which is either tremendous self-control or such deep familiarity with this outcome that she has long since made her peace with it, and you cannot tell which, and you're not sure she can either. You say nothing. You are looking at the ledger page. You cannot read all of it from your angle and this distance, but you can see enough. The columns of numbers, the totals, the final figure, and above all of that, the invisible weight of the system that produced it. The commission rates and the interest charges and the gin fees and the mule rental and the seed cost and all the other mechanisms that ensure that a man who works 40 acres of cotton from February to November ends the year not with money in his hand but with debt in a ledger that will follow him into the next year and the year after that and the year after that. "Anything else?" Thomas Calhoun says. "No, sir," Mama Grace says. She turns and walks out of the commissary. You follow her. Outside, the cold air hits your face. Ada Tillman is waiting by the door, her hands folded. She reads Mama Grace's face without asking a word. Her own face shows that she knows what she's about to hear. Mama Grace says quietly, "We're short 47. Ada Tillman closes her eyes for a moment, then opens them. She puts her hand on Mama Grace's arm. "How much were you short last year?" 31. "We were short 52, Ada says. "So it goes." The two women stand together for a moment in the November cold, their breath making two white clouds. Behind them, through the commissary window, Thomas Calhoun is turning to the next family's page. So it goes. This is the system working as designed. This is not a bad year or an accident or a miscalculation. This is the sharecropping system in the Mississippi Delta in 1933 doing exactly what it was built to do, ensuring that the people who work the land never accumulate enough equity to own anything, never build enough savings to leave, never gain enough independence to bargain for better terms. You're not the first generation of your family to stand outside this commissary with this feeling. You will not this year, not for a while, be the last. Mama Grace walks home without stopping. You keep pace with her. You don't talk, which is the right thing to do. You walk through the bare cotton rows, the dead stalks on either side, the frost-browned grass in the road, the cold and the grey November sky overhead. She goes straight to the kitchen when you get home. She builds the fire up hot, hotter than usual, the way some people clean when they're angry. She puts the butter beans on to soak. She dried and saved them from the garden, 2 pounds of them, which is the bean supply for approximately the next 3 weeks. She takes down the cornmeal sack and checks the weight. You lean in the doorway and watch her. "Mama Grace," you say. "Don't," she says. Not harshly, just precisely. She knows what you are going to say. She's heard it before, because there was a man who used to be in this house who said it too in variations over years. Something about unfairness, something about what ought to be done, something about how this cannot go on. She agrees with all of it. She also has to eat in February. She also has 2 people to feed through a Delta winter on a starting balance of negative $47. 47, you say, just to say it out loud. Yes, she says, we worked every day. I know. We picked 2,400 pounds. I know, baby. She turns from the stove and looks at you. Her face is what it always is, composed, tired, real. She looks at you for a long moment, and in that look is everything that she could say and won't say in the kitchen on a November afternoon when there are beans to start and wood to bring in and supper to make. Then she says, "Come here." You cross the kitchen and she puts her arms round you and holds on, which she has not done in perhaps 2 years, which she does now because it's November and the number is 47, and you are still at 16 her boy. She smells of wood smoke and cornmeal and something herbal from the poke greens she dried last summer and keeps in a cloth bag by the stove. You stand there for a moment, held. Then she lets go. "Get the wood," she says. You get the wood. There is a man named Silas Proctor who lives on a plot at the far south end of the Calhoun plantation, and on Saturday nights in the summer he plays guitar on his porch. You've been hearing his guitar your whole life. It's part of the Saturday night sound of the plantation, along with the night insects and the distant sound of conversation from the road, and the occasional bark of a dog. He plays and someone sings, sometimes Silas himself, sometimes whoever happens to be sitting on his porch, and the music drifts across the cotton rows in the evening air and reaches the Monroe shack as something almost too far away to identify, just a thread of melody weaving through the other sounds. In November, Silas doesn't play outside because it's cold, but on the Saturday after settlement, he builds a fire in the yard and he plays outside anyway, because he's been doing it every Saturday for 30 years, and he is not going to let a bad November take that from him. You hear it from your shack and you go. A small group has gathered by the fire. Silas is on an upturned crate with his guitar across his knee, a battered Gibson with a crack in the top that's been glued and clamped and held with wire. He's maybe 50, Silas, with hands that look too big for the guitar and somehow make it sound better than it should. He's playing something slow and low that you don't have a name for, but your body knows it the way your body knows hunger, knows what it means. It means this, all of this, the fields and the commissary and the cold and the short end of the $47 year. It means, I am still here. I am still playing. You took the money and you took the crop and you kept the books, and I am still here in this yard with a cracked guitar and a fire, and I am still playing. This music comes from this land and these conditions the same way the pokeweed comes from this soil, not because anyone cultivated it, but because it grew up through the pressure and the hard clay and the hot summers anyway. This music will outlast Thomas Calhoun's ledger. This music will outlast the plantation itself, outlast the sharecropping system, outlast every mechanism designed to keep these families in this debt. This music will go north in the suitcases of the people who leave, and will cross the ocean in records and will become something the whole world knows, and people in cities that don't yet know the names of these plantations will listen to it and feel something they can't name, which is the feeling of this yard, this fire, this November, this $47 deficit, and the guitar still playing. You don't know that yet. You're 16 and it's cold and you're standing by Silas Proctor's fire. But the music does something to you anyway. Makes the 47 feel smaller. Not gone. Not fine, but smaller. The way things become smaller when they are acknowledged out loud, which is what music is. An acknowledgement, a saying of the thing, the field, the heat, the short end, the endless labour, the year, the accumulated weight of all the years. The music says it so you don't have to carry it alone in silence. You stand by the fire until it burns low. Then you walk home through the cold, your breath making white smoke, the guitar still playing behind you, growing fainter with each step until it's just part of the night. December is dried beans and sweet potatoes and whatever you can hunt. The sweet potato pile is in the corner of the kitchen, covered with straw to keep the cold off. You grew them in the garden plot, tended them through the summer, dug them in October. There are maybe 50 pounds of them. Enough, if you're careful, to carry through to March. You eat them baked in the coals. You eat them mashed with a little molasses and lard. You eat them in the Brunswick stew with whatever the hunting provides. You eat them in every way a sweet potato can be eaten, which is many ways, and by February you will be not entirely sure you can look at another sweet potato, but you will eat it anyway because it is what there is. The dried beans, black-eyed peas, dried in August and stored in jars, butter beans, dried field peas, enough of each, counted and rationed for one pot every 2 or 3 days. You eat cornbread every day. Every day. For breakfast, for lunch, for supper, cornbread is present. It changes. Sometimes it's thinner, made with more water when the meal is running low. Sometimes it's richer, made with an egg when the hen cooperates, with a little lard for texture. But it's there every day, every meal, the structural foundation of the winter diet. You will eat so much cornbread this winter that in some future year, when you have more options, when you're somewhere that has more options, you will still reach for cornbread instinctively, still feel that something is missing from a meal without it. The body doesn't forget its foundations. The hunting carries the winter. January is rabbit season in the Delta. The rabbits fat from having foraged all fall. You set snares and you shoot, and most days through January you come home with something. Rabbit stew, slow cooked all day, the broth building depth from the bones, fried rabbit, which cooks faster and crisper in the skillet, and which Mama Grace serves with cornbread and the last of the dried mustard greens from the summer. In January you also dig in the frozen edges of the bayou for crayfish. This sounds miserable, and is slightly, but crayfish in the winter are slow and easy to catch, and a couple pounds of crayfish tails cooked in the last of the laird with onion and a little red pepper. Pepper you grew yourself in the garden and dried in the window in September. That's a meal that tastes like something special, something that makes January bearable. February comes, and with it the commissary. February 15th, Mama Grace presents herself at the counter. The ledger is open. Thomas Calhoun is there. The provisions are distributed. Cornmeal, salt pork, molasses, a small sack of coffee beans that weren't in the allotment last year, and appears this year with no explanation, which you take as a small and puzzling grace. And the new year of debt begins. You carry the provisions home in a flour sack across your shoulder, walking the 1.5 miles from the commissary in the February cold, and when you get home Mama Grace measures them and calculates and does the arithmetic of how long they'll last and when you'll need to supplement them with what the bayou and the garden and the woods provide. Then she makes coffee, real coffee, in the pot on the stove, the beans cracked in the wooden mortar and boiled until the kitchen smells of something warm and dark and slightly bitter that cuts through the wood smoke and the old smell of the walls. She pours it into 2 cups and she sits down across from you at the plank table. The coffee is hot. It's bitter. There's nothing to sweeten it with. The molasses is for cooking, not for coffee, and there's no sugar until spring. You drink it black and hot, and it is the best thing you've had in weeks. Outside, February. The bare cotton stalks waiting. The red clay road frozen. The 40 acres of someone else's land waiting for February 15th. Waiting for the provisions to be distributed. Waiting for the debt to be added to. Waiting for the whole season to begin again. But in here, coffee. Warm, the 2 of you. February, Mama Grace says. Yes, Mum, you say, which means we made it through, which means here we are again, which means let's begin. She finishes her coffee and stands up and begins moving toward the door, toward the year, and you finish yours and you follow her. The years do not blur together exactly. Each one is different in its specifics. The catfish run is better some years than others. The muscadines come in heavy some Augusts, and barely at all in others. The rabbits are abundant one winter and gone the next. The weather shifts. A wet spring that drowns the seeds and costs you 2 weeks of replanting. A drought summer that pushes the cotton to half a yield before the August rains save it. A November cold snap that kills the last of the garden before you can harvest it. So December is thinner than it should be. But the rhythm is the same. February, plant. May, chop. Which means walking the rows and thinning the cotton plants and chopping the weeds, stooped, with a long-handled hoe, from dawn to noon, noon to dusk. July, early picking. August, the heat, the full picking, the muscadines, the catfish, the plum tree if the tree has a good year. September, heavier picking. October, late picking. November, settlement. The same number, never enough. Different numbers, but never enough. You learn the rhythm of hunger the way you learn the rhythm of cotton. Deeply, in your body, below the level of thought. The spring hunger, when the winter stores are depleted and the garden isn't producing yet, when you lean hard on whatever you can catch or forage. The late summer fullness, relative fullness, when the garden is going and the fishing is good and the muscadines are in, and for a few weeks things are all right. The fall anxiety, which starts in September as you watch the cotton come in and do the mental calculation, the same calculation every year, knowing what the number will be before you stand at the commissary counter. You get better at the foraging. You learn every plant on the land that is edible and when it's edible and how to prepare it. You know by touch whether a pokeweed shoot is young enough to be safe. You know by smell whether the catfish smells of the bayou or smells of something wrong. You know which creek banks have the white clay that's been eaten by families on this land for generations. And you know this not because you eat it, but because you know everything about the land you work. Because knowing the land is survival. You become good at the fishing. Your aim with the .22 improves until you're rarely missing a squirrel, which matters because shells cost money and missed shots cost twice. Once in the shell and once in the meal you didn't bring home. Mama Grace teaches you everything she knows about cooking what you have. She teaches you that salt pork goes in first, always, because the fat is the foundation. She teaches you that you can extend dried beans by adding potatoes, which cook down into the broth and thicken it. She teaches you that wild greens lose their bitterness with a long, slow cook and enough salt and fat. She teaches you that every bone, every scrap, every piece of fat that isn't eaten at the meal goes into a pot of water on the back of the stove to become broth, which becomes the liquid that the next meal cooks in. Nothing is wasted. In the Monroe kitchen, nothing has ever been wasted. The concept of waste in food is as foreign as the concept of having too much. She teaches you how to tell when the commissary cornmeal is going bad. A slight greasiness on the surface, a smell that starts sweet and tips towards sour, and what to do about it. Use it faster. Toast it in the dry skillet to drive off the rancidity. Make Johnny cakes instead of cornbread because the thinner cakes cook faster and the high heat masks the taste better. She teaches you how to dry herbs from the garden. Thyme, sage, a little pot of something she calls wonder herb, that she grew from a seed her mother gave her, dark green and peppery, the name of which she never told you, which you called wonder herb because it made the beans taste like something you'd pay money for. She teaches you that a persimmon pudding baked with just a little more fat than you think you need comes out with a crust like a cake, and that this matters on settlement day in November when you need something in the evening that tastes like a decision to continue. The world changes while you're picking cotton. The New Deal, FDR's program, starts reaching the Delta in 1934. The Agricultural Adjustment Act passes. The government will pay farmers to reduce their cotton acreage, reduce production to drive prices up. They pay the landowners, not the sharecroppers. The sharecroppers don't own the land, so the government payments go to the man who does. Thomas Calhoun receives government money for not planting cotton on 20 of your 40 acres, which means you have 20 fewer acres to pick, which means your yield falls, which means your share of the crop falls, which means your balance at the commissary shifts further toward the wrong side. The government is trying to help. It's helping Thomas Calhoun. In Tironza, Arkansas, 40 miles north, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union holds its first meeting. White and black sharecroppers together, which is the radical thing, which is the reason certain people in certain positions of authority begin watching it carefully. You hear about it from Will Winslow, who heard about it from a man in Greenwood. The STFU is organizing, spreading from Tironza south into Mississippi, trying to get the sharecroppers to demand their share of the government payments. You think about the meetings for a week. You think about what happens to men who go to those meetings. There are things you've heard. Beatings. A man in Arkansas who was shot. Families evicted from their plots in the middle of winter. You think about $47. You think about $43 the year before that. You think about Will Winslow on his step saying a man gets tired. In the spring of 1935, you walk 4 miles to a meeting at a church house in a settlement east of Greenwood. What happens at that meeting is a different story, for a different night. But you go. On quiet evenings in the fall, when the cotton is in and the settlement is done, and the weight of the year has been measured and found what it is, you sit on the step of the Monroe shack and watch the Delta dark come down. It comes fast. There's no twilight in the Delta the way there's twilight in places with hills. The sun goes behind the flat horizon and the light drops quickly, from orange to grey to dark, and then the sky gets enormous. The Delta sky at night is the biggest thing you know. No hills to cut it, no tall buildings, just the flat land and above it the entire dome of sky from horizon to horizon. The stars impossibly thick, the Milky Way a smear of light across the middle of all of it. You've stared at it your whole life and it hasn't gotten smaller. From inside, the smell of whatever Mama Grace has on the stove. Tonight, pinto beans and the ham hock she's been saving since October, slow-cooked since noon, the kitchen full of the deep, savoury smell of beans going soft in long-simmered broth. The smell means supper is close. The smell means home. You think about the day, picking 312 pounds between the two of you. A good day, a very good day. Your hands ache in the specific way they ache at the end of a good picking day, the ache that comes from 10,000 repetitions of the same careful pull and release, the joints stiff from the repeated motion, the fingertips numb and then tender by turns. Your left shoulder aches where the sack strap sits, your lower back aches. Your feet, in the cracked left boot, are damp. This is the body's accounting of the day. Everything is in it. The early start, the heat that's built through the morning, the long afternoon rows, the walk back, the water jug that ran out at 3. The body keeps better books than Thomas Calhoun. The mockingbird in the sycamore is starting his evening set. Down the road, a lamp goes on in the Tillman shack. You can see it through the cotton rows, a small yellow point of light in the dark. The smell of supper reaches you again, stronger now. You lean your back against the door frame and you close your eyes for a moment and you take stock. You are 16, 17 next spring. You have worked this land for as long as you can remember, and you will work it for the foreseeable future, and the foreseeable future in November 1933 in Leflore County. Mississippi is not full of obvious alternatives. The debt carries forward. The system continues. The cotton will need picking again in July. But you know things now that you didn't know before. You know how to find the plum tree past the big cypress. You know which side of the bayou bank holds the biggest catfish in late summer. You know how to read the commissary ledger, even from the wrong side of the counter. You know the music that comes from Silas Proctor's guitar on Saturday nights, and what it means, and why it matters that it keeps playing. You know Mama Grace, really know her, in the way you can only know a person when you've sat with them through hard winters. You know the way she moves when she's thinking, the way she adds less to her bowl, the way she holds herself in the church coat on settlement day, the way she says February on the first morning of the new allotment and means we made it and we begin again. You know the tastes of survival. You know the salt pork and cornbread and black-eyed peas is not just what poor people eat. It is a cuisine with its own logic, its own depths, its own pleasures when you know where to find them. You know that catfish fried in lard with a cornmeal crust is one of the best things anyone has ever eaten. You know that plum jam on warm cornbread is sweetness that you don't take for granted because you know what went into finding those plums and making that jam. You know that a pot of butter beans that has been simmering since morning with a ham hock is a form of wealth, and that wealth has nothing to do with Thomas Calhoun's ledger. You know that watermelon at a gathering tastes different than watermelon alone, that the taste of it has something to do with Cornelius Tillman's grandmother's field peas and Mrs. Carter's sweet potato pie, and Reverend Beauchamp's voice filling the yard. That food eaten in community is not the same food as food eaten alone, that something happens when people who have been working the same hard ground all summer bring what they have to the same table. You know how to make something from almost nothing. You are 16 years old, and this is the most important thing you know. The supper is good tonight. You eat at the plank table, the lamp between you, the pinto beans dark and savoury in their broth, ladled over a piece of cornbread that soaks it up and becomes something else entirely. Mama Grace eats a full bowl tonight, which means she is fed, which means things are as all right as they're going to be this November. She's telling you something about Ada Tillman's youngest, who is sick, who needs a poultice, who Ada treats with a remedy involving mullein leaves and whiskey that she makes herself and stores in a blue bottle under the porch. You listen and eat and the lamp flickers in a draught from somewhere in the old walls, and the night outside the windows is full of delta sounds. You finish the bowl. You wipe it with the last of the cornbread. You feel the weight of the day settling into your body. Everything hurts a little in the pleasantly definitive way that comes from real work. Your hands, your shoulder, your lower back, your feet. You wash the bowls in the pan by the back door, the water cold now. Your hands go red from the cold water and then warm again slowly. Mama Grace banks the fire for the night. The lamp gutters. You say good night and climb to your room. The back room, the small room, the room that is just big enough for a corn shuck mattress and a peg for your clothes and a small window that faces east. You undress in the dark. The mattress accepts your weight with its familiar crackle, the corn shucks settling and shifting under you, making a shape for you that is your shape after years of sleeping on it. You put your arm over your eyes. The delta sounds come through the wall and the window. The tree frogs, which are different from the spring frogs, higher and more constant. The distant call of something in the bayou that you've never identified, a long drawn-out sound that comes maybe twice a night. A train, far off, following the tracks south toward Greenwood, its whistle carrying across the flat land for miles. The train always sounds like possibility, like distance, like somewhere else. You've been listening to that train your whole life. Tonight you let the sound of it carry you somewhere that isn't the commissary ledger, isn't the $47, isn't the bare cotton stalk standing in the November field. Tonight the train goes somewhere warm, somewhere with more options, somewhere the people who arrive in it arrive with debt that can be paid off, with labour that accumulates into something, with numbers in a ledger that eventually resolve in their favour. Maybe Chicago in 5 years, 10 years, when you have more saved, when you're older, when there's something waiting for you there besides hope. Maybe not. The Delta has a way of keeping people, not through goodness, through mathematics, through the same mechanism you saw in the commissary on the first Monday of November, the debt that carries forward, the year that starts with a minus, the system that is designed to prevent accumulation, but also through other things, through Silas Proctor's guitar on a Saturday night, through the persimmon pudding in October, through Ada Tillman and Mama Grace standing outside the commissary with their hands folded and their breath making white clouds, and the knowledge between them that they have been through this and will be through more of this, and are still standing. Through the big delta sky at night, the stars so thick they blur together, the Milky Way running from east to west across the whole dark dome of the world. Through the smell of beans and wood smoke from the kitchen below you right now, these things also keep people. Not everyone leaves. Not everyone is supposed to. Your eyes are heavy. The corn shucks settle. The tree frogs go on. The train whistle fades into the distance, following the track south. Somewhere past the bayou, Silas Proctor is probably still up, sitting on his porch in the November cold with the cracked Gibson across his knee, picking out something slow and low that the delta night absorbs like water absorbing light. You think about the plum tree, about the morning you found it, Cornelius's face when he opened his hands, the 4 muscadines and 1 perfect plum, the walk through the wet grass to the tree in the shade and the hour of picking, both of you stained purple-red by the end. You think about the catfish frying. You think about the watermelon at the gathering, cold and sweet, Reverend Beauchamp's watermelon, and the children with the juice on their elbows. You think about coffee this morning, black and bitter and hot, 2 cups at the plank table in February, the new year of debt beginning. You think about Mama Grace's hands on the wooden spoon. Warm, reliable, the most reliable thing you know. Sleep comes the way it comes after hard physical work. Not gradually, not as a drifting, but as a sudden depth. One moment you're in the room with the tree frogs and the distant train. The next moment you're somewhere else. Somewhere that doesn't have debts or commissaries or salt pork or cotton. Somewhere that just is. The body earns sleep when it works this hard. There's no question about it. No lying awake unable to settle. The body has a simple accounting. This much work, this much rest. Everything balanced. $47, £2,412, 5 cents a pound. These numbers lose their edges in the sleep. They're still there somewhere. They'll be there in the morning, real and sharp again. But right now they're just shapes. Just the shapes of the day, receding. The corn shuck mattress. The cold wall. The night outside. You are warm enough, fed enough, alive enough. In the Mississippi Delta in November 1933, that is its own kind of arithmetic. The kind that doesn't go in Thomas Calhoun's ledger. The kind that belongs to no one but you. Centuries will pass. The plantation will be sold. The commissary will be torn down. The sharecropping system will end eventually. Not quickly enough, not cleanly enough, but it will end. The shotgun shack will be gone. The plank table, the salt pork barrel. But the food will stay. Cornbread in a cast-iron skillet. Black-eyed peas with a piece of the pork in the liquid, simmering since morning. Catfish in hot lard, dusted in cornmeal. Sweet potato pie at a gathering, the children getting the first slices. Poke salad, boiled twice, and slow-cooked with fat. The way Mama Grace's mother made it. The way her mother's mother made it. The way the women of the Delta learned to make food out of what the land offered when everything else was taken. This food will travel north in the minds of the people who leave. It will show up in kitchens in Chicago and Detroit, in family dinners in cities where the Delta is 3 generations back, and it will taste like home to people who have never been south of Ohio. It will be studied. It will be celebrated. It will be called soul food, which is a good name, because it is what the soul of a people tastes like when the soul of a people has been asked to survive on almost nothing, and has found a way to make almost nothing into something that feeds and sustains and holds people together. The music will go north too. Silas Proctor's guitar, and the 100 guitars like it on the 100 porches like his, and the music that came out of the same soil as the pokeweed and the persimmons, that music will change the world. Some things don't change. The hunger of a body that has worked all day doesn't change. The satisfaction of a meal at the end of that day doesn't change. The way a fire smells in a kitchen when the beans have been going since morning. The smell that reaches you before you open the door that says, "You're home, come in, there's food." That doesn't change. So let the sounds of the Delta carry you where the sounds of the Delta always carry you. Let the tree frogs go on. Let the train whistle fade into the flat dark. Let the corn shuck settle under you, your shape in the mattress, your weight in the night. Let the smell of wood smoke from the banked fire downstairs be the last thing you notice before you stop noticing. Let the $47 be tomorrow's problem. Let tomorrow be tomorrow. Right now, in this room, on this night, you have done what was asked of you. You have worked the land. You have fed yourself and the person you love with what the land and the bayou and the woods provided. You have stood at the commissary counter and heard a number that was wrong, that was deeply and systemically wrong, and you have walked home through the cold and made supper and sat at the table and eaten and continued. That is not nothing. In 1933 Mississippi, that is not nothing at all. Rest now. Let the delta hold you. Let the night be what the night is. Enormous, starlit, humming with the sounds of things alive in the dark. You are warm enough, fed enough, held enough. Sleep. Good night.